Good morning and welcome to the Standing Committee meeting for Wednesday, November 1st, 2023. Our first order of business is roll call. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Reverend Burgess. Mr. Coghill.
Here.
Ms. Gross.
Here.
Mr. Kraus. Mrs. Keel-Smith.
Here.
Mrs. Strasburger.
Here.
Mrs. Warwick. Mr. Wilson.
Here.
Mr. Lavelle, Chair.
Here.
6 members present.
Thank you. Our next order of business is public comment. I would like to remind all speakers that the rules of council state that comments are limited to matters of concern, official action, or deliberation, which are or may be before City Council. Profanity is not permitted. After you are called, please restate your name, provide your neighborhood for the record. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Our first registered speaker is Naomi Mullen.
Right.
I saw you come off of mute, Ms. Mullen, but we cannot hear you.
Here,
There we go.
shady trees, not shady deals in Bon Air. The Public School Board of Education in Pittsburgh has zero regard for the rights of the property owners, taxpayers, citizens, and voters in the Bon Air community. We do not consent to the detrimental school building remaining in our community. We do want a green space to replace the building and improve the location. This is the least that can be done to repair the loss that has occurred. The public servants of the school board shall work with the community to the best of their ability. It was fraudulent to claim that the community approved apartments. The school board has proven itself as detrimental. Will you be part of the solution? Mayor Gainey showed up at our Bon Air town hall meeting. He saw clearly with his own eyes that there was strong opposition to apartments in the long-closed Bon Air school. Councilman Coghill was so convinced of the opposition to apartments that the planned virtual meeting was canceled. Had the residents known the virtual meeting would not occur, there would have been even more opponents in attendance at the town hall meeting. Former Mayor Peduto appointed a board to recommend that the school not be torn down. What gives anyone the right to usurp the will of residents who have quality of life and property value to defend? Politicians and Big Pharma. A whistleblower in France reported that the former minister of budget had taken millions in bribes. The money was deposited in a Swiss bank account. Pfizer was a major bribe gifter, according to investigations. The WHO is the World Health Organization that is funded primarily from commercial income sources. The Gates Foundation invests in immunizations and profits greatly from that. The CDC is funded by the Gates and Bloomberg foundations as well. The FDA is funded greatly by Big Pharma. The Gates Foundation collaborates with the FDA. How can there not be a conflict of interest? Regardless of the Bill Gates involvement with Jeffrey Epstein, screw the WHO, stop the WHO, and shady trees, not shady deals in Bon Air. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next registered speaker is Dr. Ronald Lynn Miller.
Dr. Ronald Lynn Miller, Belshoover, Ulm, Germany. I have a link with Ulm. It's the birthplace of Jewish German Albert Einstein. And he thought in German and he wrote in German, and he was also Jewish German. I'm a Global Intelligence Society candidate for president, 2024, globalintelligencesociety.org. I have memberships in the divisions of the American Physical Society, Quantum Information, Gravitational Physics, and Nuclear Physics. A concern of this council is clearly decorum in the council room. Decorum requires one citizen not interfering with the property, the satchel, bag, files, or papers of another citizen. $1 million a year, CMU Jehanian did not observe that. for CGSII Corp. PA 2831602, President Miller, president of that corporation, 31 October 2023. So I am referring the actions of Jehanian and his buddies inspecting and moving my personal property. Did they steal anything from it? Without my permission in the council room to the American Association of University Administrators for Ethics Violations. This is fifth grade behavior. I don't view this as a sophisticated class intellectual act at all. I said yesterday that the council also has a concern for the word global and attaching it to many things, but it usually seems to mean, without a whole lot of definition from anybody, worldwide, and claiming in my publications that is a mistake, that in the 21 primary disciplines, global means different things. I talked about biogenetic studies yesterday as an example. I'm giving an example today of brain neural system information and intelligence. The primary meaning of global in brain neural system studies and research is not worldwide. Global brain neural system information and intelligence means that all of the brain system, neural system, especially the brain intercerebral links across the corpus callosum, is at work. So I have a fusion of global and local that I call glocal. I'm not the inventor of that. The brain neural application I introduced on 21 July 2010 for valuing that work and also for protecting our citizens. We need to do this in relationship to brain organoids.
That exhausts our list of registered speakers. If anyone in chambers wishing to speak, please come forward at this time. Provide your name, neighborhood for the record. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name is Javon F. Brown. For those of you at home, I have some signs, and maybe you could take a picture of them so you could actually read what it says. The first sign is about Sapala. First thing I want to tell you, black voters count. We count. And I think a lot of you know it, but you don't act like it. So anyway, I have here, this is what the newspaper says. Republican Steve Sapala will not keep us safe. Okay, Lamb was on the radio today talking about our mayor getting these trucks. Now, I'm sorry, I deviated, but you need to hear this. Because I live on that street, and you remember I came down here then and told you that I was cleaning, I cleaned all them streets up. Well, Gloria Jones, who was your union man, who's the mother of the union man that died, she had seen me out there cleaning, and she told me, she said, Miss Brown, they can't, she said, we asked about this. She said, they can't do it because of the small street, how small the street is. But when I listened to Jens talking about the mayor bought trucks, he bought huge trucks. Seemed like the mayor should have known we need some little trucks, because that street had not been cleaned. The woman that got beat up that time, both with black eyes, someone broke in her apartment, she saw me. She came, she said, thank you, baby. She said, because the rats and raccoons would jump out at her. She said, I had to go another different way. Thank you for letting me be able to walk down the street. But anyway, let me finish about Sapala. This is my son. He was 35 at that time. You see where it says, I can't breathe. My son was on the floor saying that he couldn't breathe, bleeding from his head. He's saying he had one lung, and they left him. They left him there. They became his judge, jury, and executioner, because the man came back and kicked my son to death. Here's this Rocky. Rocky's running. Now, the last election, on election day, when I left city council, there was Rocky with a cameraman. Well, anytime there's cameras, I don't get in the camera, but I wanted to see what he was saying. And this man was saying that he should be take Fitzgerald's place. And I asked him, where you come from, Louis? Where did you come from? And he was telling me how good he would be because he was a manager of the bank. I mean, he ran the bank system. I tell you something, for me coming down here and watching this, the businessmen that we have at this table, we don't need businessmen because you just think that you're still running the business, but you're a councilman. You're supposed to listen to us. My time is up.
Thank you very much. Any further speakers? Any further speakers? Seeing none, that takes us to our standing committee agenda. Our first committee is Finance and Law, chaired by myself. We have one deferred paper, Bill 1834.
Bill 1834, ordinance amending and supplementing the Pittsburgh Code of Ordinances, Title I, Administrative, Article 7, Procedures, Chapter 161, Contracts, Section 161.02, Competitive Bidding Exceptions, 161.02A, Award of Professional Services Agreements, and 161.02B, Exemptions from Competitive Process to amend the approval processes for professional services agreements and exemptions from the same.
Motion to approve, brief discussion.
Second.
Discussion, Councilman?
Yes, thank you. First, I want to start by saying the same thing I said when Reverend Burgess and I introduced this bill, is that in no way do we believe the administration intentionally did any wrongdoing with procurement or no-bid contracts, okay? This was simply to put safeguards in place for this council, and councils in the future, and administrations in the future. I will say, although we know it wasn't intentional, I think that we need to tighten our belt and really look at the procurement process to make sure it's done properly. And we put a lot of safeguards in it, and we think it's ready to be voted on today. So with that, I will say that, quite the contrary, where, the press had made it out to be like we were, looking into the administration and how they conducted business. We worked hand in hand with the administration, okay, as to all the changes that need done there. I think the administration agrees also that these safeguards are good to have in place, again, for not only us now, but future administrations and councils that are at this table. So everything we coordinated with the administration, we're in agreement with. And I think that they will agree with that, and we'll call them to the table when the time is appropriate to answer any questions we might have. The only thing that's a question, I think, with the administration is we are requiring our law department to sign off on any contract. And that is so when that comes to our table, we want to make sure it's fully vetted. It's not our job. We can't vet everything that comes down the pike and comes on this table. So just to protect us and to protect the administration, we put those safeguards in place. Now, there's a lot of things here that, we tweaked and made some changes to, and we'll have those necessary people at the table to answer any questions that council may have. But with that, I will open back up to members.
Point
Sure.
of clarity, it's for waivers, not for all contracts, correct?
Yes, this is for waivers that come over from the administration, no bid contracts that, we want to know. And we're also going to require quarterly reports, which we both agreed on. And, so we work together on this. And I guess I'll just call the administration to the table now, just to answer any questions that we might have. Would you come up, please?
Councilman, as we do that, you want to make a motion to amend first, so we're discussing the actual amendment.
Okay, yes, motion to amend.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Director?
Good morning, Jake Pollack, Deputy Mayor and Director of the Office of Management and Budget.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Councilman, if I could just briefly.
Yep.
I agree entirely with your summary of the conversations we've had and I've had with your staff regarding the amendment that was just adopted in its approach to the ITQ, or the invitation to qualify, sometimes alternatively referred to as the pre-qualified list. Right? These are contracts in which we issue competitive RFPs for firms or providers to demonstrate their qualification, their ability to do certain types of work. When they are judged to be qualified to do the types of work that the city needs, they're placed on that list. And then when they're on that list, that means they've been pre-approved to do that work, and so we can issue work orders to them to complete work basically on an emergency or expedited basis. Right? Part of what they submit in their qualification process is their general pricing. Again, we can't say by its very nature how much they'll charge us for a particular job, but we know what they charge per hour for certain types of work. And those things are pre-vetted and pre-approved. So it is a genuinely competitive process. It just, it occurs before we know exactly what work we'll assign. And then we can assign work orders under the terms that are in that contract. So the amendment today, recognizing the value of having that approach available under certain circumstances, I'm thinking the need to mobilize a construction contractor or a geotechnical engineer on a Sunday to address an urgent landslide, right, when we can't spend 2 weeks going through an approval process is valid and valuable. But these changes are completely in line with that need. They lower the contracting caps. They require some additional reporting that we're happy to provide. We already produce that information, so a formal requirement to submit that to council is entirely appropriate, and we're happy to comply with that. So very supportive of that, and I appreciate your working with us on that component. I have asked the solicitor to join us because to come into chambers, of course, it's to council's discretion as to whether or not to call her to the table. But as relates to the other provision of the amendment, changing the designation of the entity responsible for signing off on waiver requests, my primary concern as we've been working through this process and in our communications was that the original version of the bill, which assigned that responsibility to the controller, was inconsistent with the Home Rule Charter. So I am appreciative of council's efforts to make that change. However, I know that in at least the legal opinion that I saw, the solicitor's office had concerns with receiving that authority for other reasons not related to the charter but related to their general role, and I would appreciate the solicitor weighing in on that rather than me. So I've asked her to come up.
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see her in the back
Ms.
there.
Kubiak, thanks. Please join us. Good morning. So let me just say before, introduce yourself, please, first.
Good morning. Krisha Kubiak, City Solicitor.
Thank you. Let me just say, I know you had some concerns about signing off on these contracts. We also have concerns, and again, we want to make sure it's fully vetted when it comes to us, so we don't have to worry about whether we did things by the letter of the law. And we took the controller out because complications and other things, and probably wasn't the right source. I believe you're the right source to sign off on this, because who better to make sure that we're following the letter of the law than our law department. So if you want to speak to that, please.
I want to be careful about not getting into legal advice at the table, so let me speak in more generalities. Generally, the solicitor's office views itself as we give legal advice to our clients, but our clients are always the ones who ultimately make the decisions. We are not the people who make that decision, and I think I've even said it to most of you. I can give you advice, but you are always free to disregard it, and that's generally our role. Where I'm concerned is when the solicitor steps into a role of adjudicator and making a decision, and we've kind of resisted that in general in the past as well, so that we're not the ones who are making the call, so that we can continue to make sure that we are giving advice. The solicitor is always here to give the advice that they believe is the legally best advice available at the time. At the same time, if a party decides, I'm not going to follow that advice, which is their right to do, we are also there always to defend them. And so I think it ends up getting a little complicated if the solicitor acts in the adjudicatory role.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman, if I may, just to add some practical color to what the solicitor just mentioned. I understand that the impetus, frankly, for this legislation were I think at least 2 instances in which the use of the sole source designation or the single source designation has become controversial. We've I can tell you all that OMB and the administration consulted the law department on both of those prior to authorizing the sole source award, and followed the advice of the law department in those cases. So as it relates to law's consultative role, it's not the case that they were authorized absent input, but as the solicitor mentioned, her concern, I believe, is that the difference between them advising versus making the final call. In any event, I appreciate the broader constitutional question, if you will, and council's efforts to resolve that. But.
Right. So, when you say opinion versus
Adjudicating, like making the decision.
Right. Yeah, right.
It's kind of sitting in the role of judge on it versus just being an advocate, which is how we in the city law department determine.
I don't think the language asks you to adjudicate it as much as, we want you to look at it, sign off on it, and say this was put out to bid, and went through procurement and the necessary measures that we are comfortable with. So, and as long as we all check our boxes and make sure that things were done in a proper fashion, why would you have a problem with that?
Well, and again, ultimately, the solicitor rules serves as service to all of you. So, the solicitor's office will do whatever is directed by council.
Okay.
But,
Madam President, you wanted to say something?
Well, I just want to say our solicitor, city council solicitor, is on his way too, so we'll have him to the
good.
table too, because we have very different opinions. And so maybe we can understand, and he has things that he can refer to. So hopefully we'll get to a solution.
But, so while he's on his way, everything else, Director, you're fine with. The changes, the caps on different contractors, we vetted that with each other, and everything's fine there.
Yes, all of the changes as relates to the ITQ process are fully supported by the administration, and again, we greatly appreciate the collaboration in arriving at that result. So those
No doubt.
those changes are welcome, frankly. We in fact may in the new year pursue other changes to that process that are exactly in the same vein. We've been working towards that direction for a while. So, no, we're fully supportive of those changes. I think they were arrived at through a mutual collaboration.
Yeah.
It is this question, which is really a legal question about the role of the solicitor within the legal context of the city and the charter and everything else that we wanted to surface today. But those are the most, in my opinion, the most meaningful changes, and we're in complete agreement about those.
Yeah, well, that's good to know, and I thank you for working with us through this. I think you could look at any administration in the history of city of Pittsburgh, and there were missteps, whether it be with procurement, you name it. Okay, so this is really just to safeguard, again, this council and future administrations, and I'm glad you agree with that. So the difference is whether the law department signs off on it for us or not. I will tell you, I'm not comfortable putting any legislation forward without you looking at it, and we could discuss that, but
yeah, if council's open to it, I'd love to get a legal opinion to you by Friday, if that's possible. So, and that should hopefully fit with the time frame.
a legal opinion for what?
For this issue specifically.
Oh,
You didn't ask for one, did you?
no.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't.
Okay, forget
But,
it then. Thank you.
But you know what? I will open it up to council, Mr. Chairman, and we have my chief of staff could answer to the amounts and everything else that's in there if he's needed. Mr. Friedson's on his way, and hopefully we get over this hurdle and get this thing done. So,
Thank you. Councilman Wilson?
All right, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll just go right into this topic. I was going to touch on some other stuff, but since you're at the table, we will indulge in the sign-off requirement here. So this subsection shall require the written approval of the solicitor. This is in, I don't know what section this is, but you're probably familiar with what I'm talking about. This section right here. Is this what you're concerned about? Those two?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So is there anything that you have to do by code currently that requires you to do this with this language?
Not that I'm aware of.
So this would be precedent. So written approval. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm interested to understand more of what could go wrong if we require you to do this.
In general, when attorneys act as parties to an incident, sometimes they then therefore that make themselves witnesses, which can then therefore conflict them out of litigation if litigation arises out of the situation. So as the city, as the solicitor's office, we generally try and keep ourselves in a role that we can continue to always defend the city in our role as lawyers.
Do you see another path does the administration or the solicitor see another path to get to satisfy the need in this bill?
I would say that potentially someone in procurement
without having like that,
or someone in finance would be that, they could be the one who officially signs off on it, because someone in procurement
doesn't
has
currently
the
happen?
most.
No, it does. Presently, the agent who authorizes a sole source designation is the Chief Procurement Officer, Jen Olzinger, after the procurement division within OMB reviews the request from the requesting department for a sole source designation. Those forms ultimately bear my signature as the director of the department, but they don't even come to me unless they've been approved by the Chief Procurement Officer. And so they're the ones who are reviewing that and either doing themselves or reviewing the research done by the requesting department to justify a sole or single source designation. So that is occurring presently. Which I believe is appropriate given their role in understanding the procurement process. They're the ones who issues the RFPs, who would review the results if they come back with only a single respondent or without respondents, or who can identify whether there are other firms in that particular market segment who can produce the result.
Can I say something?
You want to have an interrogatory?
May we have an interrogatory, please? I just want to add a quick thing. I just want to make this point. The reason why we want you to look at it is so we don't end up in litigation. That's it, So that's why I want the law department to vet these contracts so we don't end up in litigation, as we're going to be anyway, but for future. So
I appreciate that, Councilman Coghill, and I actually appreciate the faith in our department for these pieces. So I
trust you.
I do.
Sorry.
I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
If you had it in your, I don't know if this is advice to council, but how would you envision this how could you see your role, in this bill to help the spirit of the bill without?
So I believe that we would still, the city solicitor's office can review all documents as part of a contract and review the documents that make up that sole source piece of it and give advice on it to the chief procurement officer or to the OMB director. So we would say, we would still be involved, I would say, in that process. And so you would still get our opinions and our knowledge in that. It's just, I'm concerned about that final decision piece of it all.
Okay. I had some other questions about this. The amounts, why are we moving the amounts? I mean, things are more expensive, so I'm kind of worried that as we lower those
That would,
amounts-
pardon me, decreasing the amounts would not preclude us. That change has two results. One would be that it would generally lead to more of the pre-qualified vendors actually receiving work orders, right? So we typically have a list of multiple providers who find themselves on the list. A lower annual cap on the amount of work they can receive means that the work is spread more broadly across everyone on the list, which I think is a perfectly appropriate and valuable determination to ensure that folks who seek pre-qualification have a greater likelihood of receiving a work order and thus are more likely to pursue inclusion on the list in the future. And lowering the overall cap on what can be assigned to a pre-qualified list would simply mean that there are some projects that would have to be competitively bid on their own rather than assigned to the pre-qualified list. So in no instance would it preclude us from completing work.
but
It
this
would-
this one here for
Which one?
open-ended, where it goes on the 500,000, like what's an example?
I'm sorry, can you say the example?
Just open-ended professional service contracts, like what's an example of open-ended professional service contract?
An open-ended professional service contract is a professional service provider who is secured through the pre-qualified list to receive work via work order.
I mean, is that a tree cutter that comes in after a
Oh, I'm sorry.
landslide? I'm just like trying to.
Professional services would be a geotechnical engineer, a design professional of some kind, not
So if
some,
they go past the 500,000, then what happens?
one of two things could happen. One is that it could be assigned to another provider on the same pre-qualified list. Alternatively, the department could choose to initiate an RFP for the particular work rather than using the pre-qualified list, in which they could bid competitively but not be selected directly by the department.
Has this been vetted by PLI? This amount, like if I got a landslide and it happens, they got to come in and do some geotechnical work, and that goes above 500,000, or they're already at, they're like 200, and then this is going to cost 323,000. They're above 500, then I guess we want them to keep doing more work. I feel like we should be vetting. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just like trying to understand this. So I just feel like we should be increasing it to, and we would all agree that we need certain contractors on hand,
Yeah.
professional services on hand to do stuff, and it meets the requirements. We have, say, landslides or
Sure.
bridge work, emergency stuff that needs done. I'm just like worried that it's not enough, but I'm just. I know other people have questions. I'm sure that it'll come out in some of those other questions.
Well, if I specific to that topic, we can assign that type of work on an emergency basis, even under the confines of this action. And it would actually be DOMI, not PLI, that will be contracting the geotechnical
Right.
engineer.
Well, no, PLI.
In
PLI
most
does have,
instances, they do. I don't
Yeah.
mean to suggest they don't. In most instances that would involve city property, it would be them. But you're correct. It could be in either case. I don't see this as a barrier to their ability to continue to do the work, in that it either requires further just use of the existing list, but still provides an opportunity to engage. And I'm fairly certain that we have an on-call contract for geotechnical services that's not utilizing the ITQ
Dabbaloni.
process. Correct, because they're essentially the only game in town. That's a different category of work.
So they would be on the 500.
They would not be affected by that limitation.
All right. Thanks.
Well, I have Councilman Strasburger, then I have Madam President, then
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I'd like to dig into first I just want to make the distinction between the two things we're talking about for everyone who's listening in who might not understand, because this was new to me and new to a lot of people. The open-ended professional contracts have not typically been a concern as of late. They are bid, they do not require a waiver. They simply are there to allow us to accomplish projects without having to go through an RFP every single time. But they are bid out, and they just happen to be on-call contractors for professional services. So given that, Director Hornstein, would you mind coming to the table? Mr. Setzler, are you here representing DOMI today? Okay, would you mind coming to the table as well? Could introduce yourselves, please.
Chris Hornstein, Director of Public Works.
Eric Setzler, Chief Engineer in the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure.
Great. My biggest concern with this portion of the bill is that it will negatively, as Councilman Wilson was alluding to, would negatively impact your ability to do really critical work that is already difficult to do. I want to make sure that by lowering the caps, by allowing for no extensions of contracts, and by, in some cases, allowing for longer periods of time of the contracts, but then no extensions, that it wouldn't be harming the work that you're doing. Are you able to make any kind of comment on what that might do or not do, if it's actually going to make no difference and you'll be able to continue to do work with these professional contracts, regardless of the language change?
Yeah, I can speak first to the cap issue. So I'm sure in looking at the caps as proposed in the change and looking at the data that we have available to us, that I don't see that for Public Works negatively impacting our ability to do our work. I see the proposed code changes in that regard as being a point of clarification.
Okay.
As of right now, we've got the same tool basically called two different things. And so for me, I think that makes it clearer for staff and for managers to execute their functions in city government. So I'm supportive of that.
Great.
Yeah, my understanding of the proposed caps, I think it does still give us a lot of capability to do work. And, there are multiple firms in most of our categories. So, as Director Pollack mentioned, it does encourage us to engage multiple firms, which is good.
And if I may, Councilperson, just the prohibition on extensions simply means we'd have to re-bid the list more frequently. Mm-hmm. It would just be a procedural action on our end to open those lists on a more frequent cycle, right? So
if we're in the middle of a large project, that on-call contractor is working on it, the person who, they wouldn't have to all of a sudden stop.
No, if the work is assigned
yeah.
during the contract period and then it extends outside of that period, as soon as we've assigned the work to them, they can complete it.
Okay.
So we would simply have to open the pre-qualified list up to new applicants more on a more consistent cycle, but it would not interrupt work in progress.
Right.
And I would fully expect if someone were pre-qualified in the current period and they sought pre-qualification in a subsequent period, unless we had serious concerns with the work they completed or they dramatically changed the terms of their application, it's unlikely that a currently pre-qualified provider would not receive pre-qualification in the subsequent period. But by making that process cycle faster, we might more frequently include new firms or providers on the list of providers available. I will defer to Director Hornstein and Chief Engineer Setzler on the question of assigning the work, but on the question of how frequently we open the list, which is really more of a procurement process question than theirs, that has negligible impact. Mm-hmm. It just makes us open the list more frequently.
And ideally, hopefully now, as we work to find and build up and, provide smaller contracts with smaller firms that then can grow and grow, especially women, minority-owned firms, et cetera, we can hopefully open those up to.
And that is where
Yeah.
the reduction in the caps is valuable, in that it ensures that we assign the work more broadly across the pre-qualified firms. And if they then receive a work order from us, that helps encourage their growth and makes them more competitive on that list, and then in the things that we have to issue in a standalone basis.
Thank you. Okay. Moving now to the other section, and I do want to thank Councilman Coghill for his work here. I should have started with that. This is important. This is, I think, a necessary conversation that we all have to have. I'm glad that council can be at the table for this as well, because I think we do have a big role to play here. The way I like to think about this, as I've learned more and more about the path, almost like the path of the waiver of a no bid contract or a exemption from competitive process, is that ideally we have a series of checklists that make its way all the way to council, right? And so almost like a stopgap. So first is the director or manager of procurement, and then a series after that. Are you able to tell us what that checklist or sort of what those different stops on the way to council are?
It starts before that, actually. The first point at which OMB receives a request is a request from the director of the department requesting the exemption, articulating the case for why the exemption is necessary. Within each department, depending on the nature of the work, I'm sure it starts even further down with a project manager or a division manager, right? Who's responsible for the contract itself, making that request to the director. And I think given the varied structures of departments, that might look slightly different, but essentially the person most responsible for the work submits a request to their superior, and that ultimately makes its way to the director, who submits an exemption request form to procurement under their own signature, explaining why they believe an exemption is warranted. That form must list the particular justification for the exemption that is requested. There are, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, more than 8, probably in the teens number of exemption possibilities that range from there's only one firm that provides this type of service, to this is the only firm that is interested in providing it to the city, to our requirements are so specific that only one person can reasonably provide it, or it's a nonprofit providing services to the city that's not making a profit. Those requests and associated documentation are reviewed by the procurement specialist assigned to that department, who makes a recommendation to the chief procurement officer, and the chief procurement officer ultimately makes a recommendation to me, which I treat as binding. I sign those requests that are recommended by the chief procurement officer, and not
as the director of OMB.
Correct. And then that is ultimately what is communicated alongside the contract language, the resolution authorizing the contract to council. That form with the exemption request takes the place of documentation of the bid procedure in the documentation that's submitted to council. So it goes through a departmental procedure. The director of the department ultimately agrees with their frontline staff who are responsible for the work. In submitting the documentation, procurement reviews it. It is then, with my signature, transmitted to council for authorization and a request for the waiver.
And Solicitor Kubiak, you mentioned that in some cases you do provide legal counsel or some sort of counsel on these particular case waivers or no bid contracts. Or
We do. We review them during the course of putting together the packages as well.
You had said before that that this language would put you at risk of being then involved to such an extent that you could be called as a witness to a future legal challenge. How does that differentiate from what you're already doing, which is engaging with the contract?
We at this point are giving legal advice to our clients, and that is protected from the court, so that's not considered a witness. That's
Got it.
just you're
Okay.
giving legal advice. But if we are the fact finder, then we can be called as a witness in litigation.
If I could add to that, council person, I rely heavily on the advice of the law department on determining whether, when and whether to sign those requests for a waiver. However, I think what the solicitor is saying is that in an instance where the law department advises that a waiver is acceptable, and then I, on their advice, approve it, if nonetheless someone, another competitor were to challenge the award, then the law department, having not been directly involved in a documented, a signature capacity, can defend our determination in a way that would be more difficult for them if the solicitor was the one to sign the request.
There's still solutions, right? Every time we're conflicted out, we can always hire outside counsel to come in and defend the city in a situation. But so I'm not saying it's we're completely boxed in. I don't want to put that forward. At the same time, we just try to maintain our system, and we do this in lots of different scenarios of not talking to, not being present at certain activities that we're not serving in a legal counsel role. We want to make sure we kind of preserve that as much as we can.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I understand exactly what you're saying. And still, it does seem like it is a sort of just a almost like a verification that these steps had previously occurred. The director of OMB has signed off, and then, oh, yes, I'm verifying that is the case, right? And then it goes to council rather than adjudicating. So I could go both ways here. I'll be eager to see what and hear what my colleagues' questions are from here as I continue to weigh this one piece of it. Ultimately, I think the other piece is whether it's in code, whether it's a policy that we follow through resolution, through a resolution, a future resolution, the communication to council, so that we are also sort of a stopgap in this process, and we are, yes, a waiver is attached to the bill, but ensuring that the proper communication is there, so that 10 years from now, when this is on no council member's radar, there's still a process in place to flag the fact that this is one that has a waiver that council members need to pay attention to, is kind of what I'm getting at. So that's something I'm also interested in. So we're part of the checklist as well. But I'll leave my questions at that for now, and be interested in hearing my colleagues' questions. Thank you.
Madam President?
Thank you. You two can leave if you want at the table. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I do want Solicitor Friedson at the table and our budget director, Peter. I want to first thank Councilman Coghill and Councilman Burgess for working on this, but I do want to say that Blake and Sean Carter have put a tremendous amount of work on this. So I want to thank your staff for the work that you allowed them to do. Thank you. And I want to thank the mayor's office for working with you on the things that you do agree on. There are some good points that you do agree on, so I want to make sure that that's out there. But I feel like there's just so much misinformation here at the table and so much conflicting things that I just want to clarify that we've been doing this up until 2020. This was the process up until 2020. And that we changed that, I believe, when we voted, correct? Solicitor Friesen, do you remember?
I'm sorry.
We did this up until the year 2020, correct?
Yeah, March of 2020 is when we changed the practice from having the law department sign off on the waiver form.
So it's not that it was in a conflict for all those years that we've been doing it. So it's just when we changed it, after we voted on it, I believe it was it Mayor Peduto who sent it over?
It was legislations, I don't know who sent it over. The
Okay.
sponsor
I
on
think
it
was prior to this
Councilman
administration,
O'Connor.
if I'm correct. And so we changed that. And the reason we're here is partly because you did sign off on a waiver. Is that right? I mean, because there were waivers that we were told that were okay, something was okay. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, typically when there is a question, like for example, when we had to hire a professional to do reapportionment, and we needed a statistician. And sure, there's lots of statisticians out there, but in calling around and having a demonstrable proof that there was only one person in town who was willing to take that job, council worked with the law department to verify that that would be a waiver of the competitive process, and so that worked for all parties, even with this law in place that didn't require. And the Home Rule Charter does require the law department to prepare all contracts, so in the end, they're going to have to sign off on this contract either way. And the way I understand the new legislation is, like, in lieu of requiring more proof up front that this is in fact sole source, and I'm just talking about sole source, not the rest of it, because there would be no competitive bidding with the sole source. There's only sole source, so there wouldn't be a lawsuit from some other bidder on a sole source. But this legislation keeps the discretion with the contracting officer. Our chief contracting officer, Director Pollock, would be the one, or whatever, whoever the director of OMB would be, making the fact determination that this is exempt from the competitive process. And then the law department would verify that that matches up with the law as codified by council.
So what I'm concerned about is that I don't want anyone getting in trouble. Not your side of the hall, not our side of the hall, not any of the employees stuck in the middle of all this. But it's concerning to me when you say that there's a conflict, solicitor, you were okay with being on the PWSA board saying there was no conflict. And so that you could do both. I mean, to me, it's contradictory to what you're saying today, that now there's a conflict. So I just want to be clear. I think we really want to know that we can trust our law department and that we're getting the best advice. And I think we all have a good relationship with you and want to believe that. But I think it's also difficult the mayor's office has their goal. We have our goals. And I would hope that somewhere we could come together and try to figure out the best way to do this so that nobody's in a compromising situation. And that we can trust fully what we're hearing from our law department and from our experts at the table, and overall, our budget director, our city council solicitor, and the mayor's office. So for me, I'm supportive of this. I want to thank you for bringing it forward, and I'm going to vote to put it back the way it was prior to 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Gross?
Thank you. I am recalling that in 2020, when we amended this, I've got both bills up side by side, that, again, there's two sections here. And I want to make sure that we preserve the part that we now call ITQ, which is invitation to qualify. And I think that some of the previous members were asking questions about that section. And I just want to review kind of what council was thinking. Some of us were here when we moved to create that process. I said it before at the time, and so I'm just going to say it again. There was a time when all city contracts were issued out individually for RFPs. But over time, the city is now doing more and more and more work that is outsourced, especially in public works, especially in DOMI, especially as we're doing so much more infrastructure work. And so it's a great amount of work. And when you, what we had been doing was issuing those RFPs as very large project bundles. And what happens there is that only the largest firms, and as you get bigger and bigger, there are only a few, responded to those requests for proposals for those very, very large project bundles. We learned the exact same lesson at PWSA, that it was a problem. We couldn't diversify the firms that we worked with. There weren't women-owned firms, there weren't minority-owned firms, that we were relying on just a handful every time. The exact same, like 3 firms would respond to these gargantuan multi-million-dollar contracts. And that wasn't good enough, that we really wanted to kind of get more contracts for city firms, smaller firms that could kind of build up local talent in engineering or contracting on this kind of work. And so the invitation to I like to think of it as pre-qualifying, right? So this ITQ, this invitation to qualify, means that you are able to have a wider variety of firms, and you know which kinds of skills they have, and then you're able to do work orders in smaller bites, as you were, that smaller firms could handle. When you bundle lots and lots of work together in a massive contract, and especially don't give a whole lot of time to respond, you ended up with just the same 3 firms who would get all of the city contracts. And it almost felt a little too much like a monopoly, and maybe we weren't getting the work quality that we wanted either. So we really believe that doing these pre-qualifications, this, again, invitation to qualify, is the same thing as the open-ended part, right? Because you've given them a contract for work, and then you leave it open, and then you're issuing work orders in these smaller kind of work batches. I really believe it has worked. We've seen it work at PwC. We've seen it work on our city contracts, and we've gotten really good quality work, and as well as the specialized work. So I want to make sure that we keep that in front of us, that this was a really important policy change that council has made over the years, and has had a really positive outcome. The second half is related, but it's not exactly the same thing, right? When we're doing these professional service awards that are sole source. I really thought the last time we discussed this, a lot of the challenge that we had was with INP and our very large software bundles, right? Because we all know how long it takes to kind of transfer software. Council has done it a couple of times, and it's been extraordinarily painful, switching, from Google to Microsoft and transferring files, and I think it took a whole year. And so it's not great that for not just us, but everybody in the world gets kind of almost enslaved to your, that's poor choice of words probably, but bound to your tech company for the software you've purchased. But it sometimes feels like we're locked in without very easily moving to a different company. So I think that's part of it too. So I don't know if who's at the table. I think it's just a city solicitor and is our budget office there too?
Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know which budget office you mean, councilperson. Both OMB and the council budget office are here.
We're both here.
So tiny on the kind of big room camera shot that I couldn't see you. So, Dr. Plug, would you like to respond to that a little bit? I mean, I'm just trying to frame for us and for the public, kind of like, why do we have this arranged this way?
I would be happy to. Thank you very much. First, I agree entirely with your first point regarding the rationale behind the ITQ, or as you said in more plain English, the pre-qualified list purpose. The purpose of that is exactly as you stated. Without that mechanism to identify a list of providers who we agree in advance are qualified and capable to provide certain services, and that then we can assign work to them via work order on both an understanding in advance of their qualification and an understanding in advance of their pricing, which we've accepted through the ITQ process, we end up making large bundles and serving only the largest firms. To that end, I think the language in this amendment, which preserves that procedure but reduces the caps on how much work can be awarded to a particular provider from the list, only further serves that objective, in that we ensure that we are working with pre-qualified firms and thus don't have to bid each scope of work individually, but that we are spreading that work across a wider number of folks on the of firms or providers on the pre-qualified list. So your point there is absolutely spot on. I would further agree that it is probably true that the most glaring and perhaps significant need for the sole or single source opportunities today are around information technology, given just sort of the state of that market, right? You brought up Microsoft, for example. I mean, our city government runs so heavily on the Office 365 sort of platform, and we utilize the full suite of Microsoft services for the user end of things. On the back-end server basis, there's only a select number of providers, all of which offer very different things. Some of our requirements are very unique, right, to the municipal market, which doesn't see a great deal of competition. I think you're right to point out that it is perhaps more concentrated there than anywhere else. But the ordinance provides for a discrete, like a specific, but kind of wider array of exemptions, which sometimes apply to neighborhood-specific concerns, right, or location-specific issues, and so firms are sometimes, or rather departments request, and we ultimately approve and submit to council requests for a waiver that are unique to those particular circumstances. So I agree entirely with your summary of the overall state of the issue and why these things are valuable, and just sort of further reinforce that in general, we take very seriously our obligation to competitively bid all contracts where that's feasible. One of the ways we make that feasible is the use of the pre-qualification process for certain types of work, and only seek exemptions in extreme situations where there are very particular and legally defined and defensible reasons why that's necessary.
Thank you, Director. Do we have our City Council budget officer at the table too? I apologize for I cannot tell who's at the table.
Yes, I'm here. Peter McDevitt, Council Budget Director.
Hi, Peter. Could you also do you have any more thoughts on how it kind of looks from your side? And just a reminder, you also see these pieces of legislation when they come over and are there for us to kind of have a set of eyes on our side of the hall.
Yes, absolutely. So I am in full agreement with everything that we've been discussing for the ITQs. It really gives the flexibility to the departments to get work done in a timely manner. RFP processes take 4 or 5 months sometimes to put a scope together and put it out for bidding, and then review all of those bids, and then go through the process of having council approve all of those contracts. So it really gives the department's flexibility to react to projects whenever they need to in a timely manner. As far as the waivers go, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to any of the legalese around it, but as you mentioned, whenever legislation is sent over to council to be introduced, I do go through every piece of legislation, and in that is included a fiscal impact statement that the clerk's office does a wonderful job of attaching that in Legistar so anybody can review that. But a very key piece of that is on the second page of it, it shows how the process in which the service or good was purchased, and whether it went through an RFP process or whether a waiver was given for it, or if it went through a different process. A good example for a different process is for a lot of our transportation improvement projects that DOMI does, we go through PennDOT's bidding system just because they pay for the majority of that, so that's a requirement of receiving those funds. But that's a really important piece, and I will say we worked with the administration to make sure that we're getting a more complete and correct version of those fiscal impact statements, so the council knows what they're voting on whenever it comes to them, because you can only know what you're told in these situations. So we want to make sure that you have a complete picture of the bills that are put in front of you, and if we're going to spend money and give somebody money for a good or a service, we want to know how we came to the conclusion that we're paying those people. So that is a position that we're in, and if we're not getting complete fiscal impact statements, we need to kick them back, and then we don't introduce that legislation, and it's on the shoulders of the administration to make sure that those are being filled out correctly and completely whenever they send them over.
I agree with that.
Wonderful. So again, and as I always like to remind people that those aren't just there for council's reference, but they are in Legistar, as you pointed out, and so they're there for the public reference as well. So it's a good public record, and that would be a complement basically to the kind of summary reports that Councilman Coghill has added here, right? So the reporting of those contracts, it says financial system designation identifier. Okay, that's a bit wonky. Is that the JDE number?
Yeah, I believe we put it that way just because we're not always going to use JDE. So
Good point.
If I could underscore that point, that contract is subject to rebid next year. So the language was meant to reflect the fact that that will be a completely competitively bid RFP process next year as we look to determine whether we continue with JDE or utilize another system. So rather than refer to the particular provider we have now, referring to it as a general category to ensure that the law still applies when we might use a different system to accomplish the same function.
That's, I didn't think of that when I was speaking earlier, but that's a great example. Have we renewed the JDE contract?
We've
with sole source for 2-4?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I know we have taken advantage of extensions that were built into the prior version of the contract. I don't know because I wasn't. The current version of the contract was in place prior to the initiation of this administration. So I don't have the historical knowledge to know whether a sole source designation has ever been used in that case. I can tell you on a forward-looking basis with absolute certainty that we don't intend to do that and intend, in fact, we've been the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, the Finance Department, and the Controller's Office, who are the primary users or managers, maybe better put, of JDE, have been meeting for months to begin developing an RFP for this to competitively bid it in 2024. So we are not intending or proposing any sole source designation for that system.
Fascinating. I mean, we're talking about the backbone of keeping track of, more than $650 million each year in operating funds. Like basically every piece of money that moves has a tracking code. And so it's a massive software, massive database that is how we keep track of what money is where. And then so in this section F is the new language again that Councilman Coghill added: name of the vendor, section 3, contract number and years remaining under the current term, and number of work orders to each vendor, which will be, again, this, like I said, you could go if you wanted to as a citizen through every single resolution that is approving one of these contracts, but then this will be the complement where there's a summary report, and that will be a lot easier, and that will also be under this new amendment in the public record at council and in Legistar, I assume, so you can see a summary.
I can't. The clerk might have to speak to the Legistar portion. We would submit it as a communication to council, and I am under the impression those are all included in the record. But so I believe yes. I just don't want to speak for the clerk's office as to how it's recorded in Legistar since we don't manage that.
I don't know. Would the clerk like to respond about how does a member of the public find, or are they easy to find online, the reports that we read into the record when we read, receive, and file?
They are listed under I think they're in the LIC. So
Great.
they can just do a search.
So in the legislative section.
Correct.
That's right. Louise and I had one of members of the clerk's office and I had a conversation about that last week, where there was some policy presentations from a post-agenda. We were considering submitting them to read into the record so they'd be easy to find. But assigning a resolution number, basically. Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Chair, I think that answers all of my questions, and thank you, everybody, for the clarifications.
Thank you. Councilwoman Warwick? You're good now? Okay. Any further discussion on the bill as amended? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Thank you all for being here. That takes us to our new paper, Bill 2082.
Bill 2082, a resolution authorizing pursuant to Chapter 210, acceptance of gifts to city of the city code, the mayor and the director of the Department of Public Works to accept a donation of 6 safety ladders from Friends of the Riverfront, valued at $12,040 to be installed along the southern shore of the Allegheny River from Rachel Carson Bridge to Point State Park at no cost to the city.
Motion to approve.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Need a motion to approve the invoices.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
I miss
opposed?
Councilman Kraus because he always does this.
Invoices are approved. Need a motion to approve the interdepartmental transfers.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Transfers are approved. Need a motion to approve the P cards.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? P cards are approved. That takes us to Public Safety and Wellness Committee, which is chaired by Councilman Coghill. We have one new paper, Bill 2068.
Bill 2068, a resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh and the Department of Public Safety to apply for a grant from the Redevelopment Authority of Allegheny County's Gaming Economic Tourism Fund for the purchase of non-fluorinated firefighting foam in the amount of $500,000 for this stated purpose.
Need a motion.
So moved.
Motion to approve.
Sorry.
Discussion?
Second.
Discussion, Councilman Wilson?
Yeah, can we, is there someone that can speak to this?
I believe Chief Jones can speak to it.
Chief.
Good morning. Daryl Jones, Chief of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire.
Good morning, Brian Coquille, Assistant Fire Chief, Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire.
Morning. I heard the term firefighting foam, and it kind of put a little fire under me to ask a question about it. What's that?
You want one?
No, I don't. No, I hope I never have to be in that situation. Can you explain what non-fluorinated firefighting foam is?
Sure. Currently, the foam that we use we use what they call alcohol-resistant aqueous film-forming foam, better known as ARAFFF. It is the foam that we would use on all Class B fires, liquid fuel fires, similar to like if we had an incident like what happened in East Palestine, Ohio. The problem is the foam carries fluorination, and it has been identified as a carcinogen. So we have this foam now that we would like to replace with what the term is green foam. It unfortunately, like everything else that's green, is more expensive, isn't isn't quite as effective, but is better for the environment.
So, I think the term that I'm familiar with, and maybe others are as well, is PFAS.
Yes.
So PFAS is in the foam that we currently have.
Yes.
And this stuff would not have PFAS in it?
That's correct.
That's gonna be my question.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. What are we going to do with the old foam?
So we will have to dispose of it. And right now, it costs approximately $100 a gallon to dispose of.
How many we have?
About 6,000 gallons.
Was it? We say 100,000 a gallon?
$100 per gallon to dispose of. Yeah, you guys go ahead and do that math real quick.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what does it currently do? It's sitting.
It's sitting there, was ready to go. Make no mistake about it. If we had an incident right now, that's the foam I would be using to suppress that fire.
If you don't, that'd be very costly cleanup as well.
Well, you're going to have to clean up anyway.
Yeah.
So whatever chemical is burning is going to have to be
Right.
remediated.
Right.
And so me putting foam on it is not going to make that big of a difference.
Yeah. And the federal government requires. I'm just making the point that would you use this foam in the future then?
Until I have something better to use, anything different to use, this is the only thing I have in my quiver. So yes, I will use that foam. And a lot of people are all
No, I
upset.
was on the new phone when it comes in.
Oh, I would use the new foam.
You would, so even if we didn't dispose of that yet, you would use the new
I
phone.
would I would use the new foam because it is available and it will be more environmentally friendly. The problem with the new foam, like I stated, is it's not quite as effective. So depending on who you ask and the researchers, you might have to use 1.5 times to 2 times the amount, depending on the fuel that's burning.
Yeah. Okay, and then the only other question I had about this was, the airport. Does the airport still? Do they use the non-fluorinated firefighting foam, or they're using?
As far as I know, they still have the foam with PFAS in it. Yes.
Okay. And then how long would this take? This is the grant.
Well, this is just permission to apply for
Yeah,
the grant.
before they apply for how?
So
when's the grant? Yeah.
I'm not sure. I haven't completely gone through the notice of funding opportunity to see what the expectation is of how long the process before they can tell us whether there's an award or not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman Warwick.
Sorry if I missed this before. Would this grant cover the full cost of the new foam?
It would be, the grant is for approximately $500,000, and at $100 per gallon, we will be better. We will have some of it. We wouldn't replace everything that we have.
So what I mean is that, well, we wouldn't, so, and apologies if is there a requirement that we not use the PFAS, or is that just because?
There is not yet a requirement, but we're expecting that to come down within the next year or so from the federal government, from the EPA, saying that we don't use the foam.
Okay, thanks.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Thank you all.
Thank you
Chief.
very much.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you.
That takes us to Public Works and Infrastructure Committee, chaired by Councilman Kraus. One supplement paper, Bill 2102.
Bill 2102, resolution providing for an agreement or agreements with SAI Consulting Engineers for costs associated with the construction management and construction inspection phases for the Charles Anderson Bridge project, providing for the payment of the cost thereof not to exceed $2,854,186.11, federally reimbursable at 95%.
Need a motion.
Councilman Kraus, motion to approve with
Second.
discussion?
Second.
Discussion, Madam President?
I didn't know if anybody else had questions. I'm good.
Any-
There was an RFP for this, right?
I believe so. I don't want to say with 100%
Okay.
certainty.
Can we just have somebody tell us that at the table? Yes. Pete, do you know? Yes, Director, please. I think you check all these before they go on the agenda for us now to make sure those things are done. I just want to make sure.
Correct. Peter McDevitt, Council Budget Director. So this is one of those TIP projects that I was actually referencing earlier when I was up here. So this is bid out through PennDOT's procurement system because it's managed through them because they pay for 95% of it. That's the procurement process we use.
Okay.
And it is bid out, so.
It is bid.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for checking. Just so people know at home, you check the agenda for us every week.
Every week.
You, Solicitor Friedson, and the Madam Clerk, to make sure your part is done, his part, everybody does their part to make sure things are legal moving forward as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. That takes us to our new papers, Bill 2074.
Bill 2074, resolution authorizing the mayor and the directors of the Department of Public Works and the Department of Finance on behalf of the city of Pittsburgh to enter into an easement agreement or agreements with Duquesne Light Company to provide a permanent easement for the relocation of its electrical system in Hayes Woods at no cost to the city.
Motion to approve, brief discussion.
Second.
Would you like to come to the table?
Since you stayed here this whole time.
Hi, Paul Swoboda from Duquesne Light Company. Happy to address any questions council has briefly. We have a transmission system in Hayeswoods Park. Have had it there for several decades, and we are moving the transmission towers away from a landslide-prone bluff at the overlook of over the Mon. So this is just to maintain the integrity of the infrastructure we already have there.
Yeah, and so I visited the site. So basically, it's a giant road now that goes in, and I think sort of silver line. I mean, we did have to cut down quite a bit of trees and whatnot to sort of plow this. It was pretty spectacular, but it does actually open up, I think, the woods, sort of gives access to the woods to areas that we wouldn't have before. So I think ultimately it will be a benefit to the city because that road will be here, and you're building it to the spec, to DOMI's specs. I don't know if you want to.
That's right. So yeah, when we originally took this on, we saw it as an opportunity to build it in such a way that the city could, if it chose, take ownership of it. And we wanted to obviously do it to the city spec so that there wouldn't be any issues with how we constructed it. Typically in these instances, when we have an access road to get us to our infrastructure, we'll build it, use it, and then revegetate it and just allow it to go back to nature. But this we saw as an opportunity to provide an amenity to the city with a new park, asset.
Yeah, so right now there's just sort of very tiny, there's a tiny little parking area and some trails, and this will actually allow people to get farther. I mean, ultimately, we'll have to do something to it, but we'll provide an access road to do things like create a campsite or just things like that in the future. So it's unfortunate, but you have to get in and get this transmission tower moved so it doesn't fall down. And I don't know if you want to describe a little bit what that would mean if we didn't do the work. I think that might be helpful for people to know.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
council members can imagine if a transmission tower were to be compromised in a catastrophic way, that would be very bad for for us all, and that would we would be doing emergency work. So doing this in a thoughtful way, I think is in everyone's best interest.
Yeah. Okay. If anyone else has questions.
Thank you, Madam President.
I just thank you for doing the work here. But aside from this, could you tell us a little bit about? And this is off the subject a little bit, but I'd like to know what Duquesne Light's doing across the city in terms of the utility poles and putting things underground. In Mount Washington on Grandview Avenue, we asked repeatedly to have the utilities moved underground, Noblestown Road, other places. And some of the poles I'm seeing are like just in such bad condition. But also I know that some of that is the reason there's like extra pieces of poles where you might see a piece next to one because you're waiting for others to disconnect their utilities as well. But could you talk to me a little bit about what the plan is going forward, if you have any, for moving utilities underground, and what the possibility might be for us to get them in areas like, because it's becoming an issue for ADA accessibility on some of the places, especially on Grandview, where there's not enough room for a wheelchair and the utility pole in the same place.
Right.
But it's also on an area prone to landslides. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think a team of us looked at the specific instance of Grandview West Grandview, there's a lot of complication there. There are many utilities mounted to the poles there. So in terms of coordination, it's a very large logistical challenge to make an already tight underground utility situation even more dense with different utilities. It's not unusual that we will do duct bank installation in roadways. We've done that in Fifth and Forbes through Uptown most recently. That's a very complex process where you have to avoid the PWSA lines, you have to avoid the People's Gas lines, other historical things that were underground. So the expense quickly balloons to, quite frankly, unmanageable levels. And our obligation as a utility is to provide the most cost-effective connection to service. And what that means is we need to keep the cost down for all customers. So putting utilities underground is the more expensive option. And so we typically ask customers who are requesting that to pay for that service. We do that, for instance, for commercial customers who
So I've
who want
actually
those
seen that now that
connections.
you're saying I have a sister in I have relatives in several wealthy suburbs, and theirs are underground.
Mhm.
And so you ask them to
Well,
individually? That's what I'm
So right, and then there are, from what I understand, around the 1960s, 1970s, there was some sort of switch at I believe at the federal level, to underground utilities in new construction residential areas. And so that's why you will typically see anything built after about the 1960s with underground utility infrastructure.
I just want to make sure that we talk about it publicly, because I think that people are asking that for this across the city in different places, and I know across my district there's been a couple places asking for it.
Yeah, and it's just to
and
respond
we've
to
talked
that.
about it, and that's why you went out.
Yeah, right, right. And it's not just in the city. Suburbs have requested that. We've had discussions there, and unfortunately, when we respond with even a ballpark cost estimate, I think it's eye-opening for.
I'd like to make sure that I think the cost is. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know the cost is exorbitant, but I think that even making sure that the utility poles are maintained well would go a long way. And I mean, I can definitely see an area in my district that is not as wealthy as some of my other areas, and I could see the difference in the way that lines are hanging down, utility poles are not maintained well, and not just your stuff but other utilities. I mean, we see cable wires for cable TV dangling, and just things like that. I would like to see the same maintenance in the suburbs in the city of Pittsburgh. That's within areas that are struggling a little bit. Thank you. But thank you for all you do. You've been really helpful for us a lot of times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, it's not too often you come to the table.
No, it's not.
So I want to take the opportunity to
Okay.
thank you and Duquesne Light every time we reach out to your office. We're always able to accomplish something. We had legislation here recently that was getting new power into the park. And, I kind of told the story, but I'm going to say it a little bit again, that the Allegheny Commons Park used to get power from the aviary, and we own the aviary. It's on a long-term lease with the aviary. That wire, my understanding, the old wire never had conduit, so every time it would rain, it would just short out. So there was no lights in the park for approximately 5 years, and then you all came in and helped us put. What did you do? You literally put a power source in the park, which is, you put it all underground, made it, fit the historic, aspect of the park and everything. Could you elaborate on everything you did in that project?
Yeah, I think in that instance, we had the great good fortune of having a power source in a nearby manhole. that was easily accessible, that didn't require disrupting a lot of asphalt or concrete, so the cost could be kept relatively minimal. And given the mature and very healthy tree canopy in the park there, I think the city made it clear it had an interest in maintaining that. And so we found a solution that allowed us to install a...
I didn't know it was me. I called you up and I said, this running these wires above ground is not going to fly. I was like, this is... Yeah.
Right. So
you went back to
in
the
that
drawing
instance,
board,
we were able to keep the cost down and kind of get to this concern that the city expressed to us about the above ground infrastructure that we had planned, and so I think it worked for all parties in this instance, and we have now a dedicated power source, and the lights are back on, which was a great.
Lights are back
great
on,
result.
and now the lights are back on. We found some other ones. Not your problem. Found some other ones on the other side of the park. And I was like, we're going to solve all the lighting issues here. So it's been a good experience. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Councilman Coghill.
Thank you. Welcome, Paul. And I echo Councilman Wilson's sentiments. Duquesne Light's always been very responsive to me, whether it's a constituent has a street light out. You change the street lights, right? When we get a call, it comes to Duquesne Light, right? And
So we change out poles, and if the street light is mounted to that pole, we will replace it. But in terms of switching out bulbs, no, the city owns its own street lighting.
So we contract that out.
Correct.
Separate from you.
Correct.
Okay. Well, they're very good at that too. So, whoever's responsibility that is. So, Paul, just out of curiosity, underground electric, as Madam President was referring to, how deep down do they put those lines?
So that is a question that changes per the project. Given the current situation under a particular street, you could see it buried only 5 or 6 feet, I think. But if you are in conflict with other existing utilities underground, you have to find a space where you won't be interfering with, as we say, a gas line or a water line. And obviously, we want to avoid any situation in the future where there would be a dig-in and you would have a water main break or you would have a gas leak because you're trying to get to your infrastructure. You accidentally contact another utility.
So you'll put them underground. I understand that. You'll put them underground if the proprietor is willing to pay for it.
Correct.
Okay. So like a commercial business wants, they don't want the poles, they don't want the wires coming in. Will you do that for residential as well?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. So we will create an estimate for the cost to run new service in the traditional low cost way of having it pole mounted, and then we will identify the cost differential between what underground installation would cost, and provide the if the request is made, we'll provide that, and they can make a determination on if they'll pay that delta, that difference, to get the underground service.
Got it. One other quick question I have for you. I've been a roofing contractor for 30 years. A lot of roofers die every year. Very seldomly is it from a fall from the roof. Probably over 50% of them are electrocuted. Now, the old means was a 3-wire system coming into the house, which are extremely dangerous for contractors working around. I've seen they converted most of them back to a single wire, and it's a lot safer. I mean, you always got to be careful around it. But can you speak to that at all, that the old 3-wire system, pronged system that comes into residential homes versus what you've been converting over probably the last 30 years at least, I would say?
Yeah, I can't speak to the timeline, but certainly it's more typical to use twisted triplex, and yeah, again, to your first point, I would just encourage any and all homeowners and commercial property owners and contractors to contact us to request either a cover up or an outage, a service outage, so that work can be performed safely. Safety is absolutely our number one priority, and we try to encourage all of our customers to avail themselves of the services we provide to ensure that work can be performed safely and that everyone can go home in the same way they arrived at work that morning.
Right, no question. And we typically, we don't call you to shut the electric off every roof we replace. That would be, it's not necessary, I don't believe. But certainly when it's mounted onto the side of the house and we're replacing the siding or something, that's when we call you in to make sure that, electric is shut off, at least for the few hours that we're working in that area. So, okay, but back to my question. So what did you call the single line versus the older style that was the 3 lines?
The twisted triplex.
Twisted triplex, right. Is that, are we converted completely? No. To twisted triplex?
No, I think there are lots of services that are still
the old
style service.
Yeah. So there's not a effort to replace all those old services. It's when
as new
service
services requested, as upgrades to service are requested, the new service will be installed with the modern standard.
Got it. Do you agree with me? The old 3 wires are a lot more dangerous than.
I don't have a perception of the level of safety, but I know that we've moved to this other standard.
Okay, Paul, thank you. I appreciate, the work Duquesne Light does. Again, there's always responsive to me. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Councilman.
Yep.
To everyone, they're good.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, you mentioned wires. Quick question. Wires that run from the poles into homes that get grown over with vines, tree lines, all that sort of stuff. Do you all come out and cut that, or is that solely on the discretion of the homeowner?
So the secondary lines that go from the pole to the home and enter the home through the meter, those are the obligation of the homeowner or the commercial property owner, and our obligation is to maintain the primary lines and the lines that, as you'll see, run along the street. So anything that runs pole to pole, for instance, if there's a tree limb threatening to fall on that, that would be our vegetation management teams who maintain those lines.
Section, you'll have to tell me which is, because there's vines both covering the wires that go from pole to pole, and then there's also a wire that then leads to the home that's also now being covered.
Yeah, if you'll bring that specific address to my attention, we'll get that.
For the public safety, just make it clear, you don't want people cutting down weeds on the wires. You want them to call you.
Thanks for letting me clarify that. Yes, we require that homeowners use line certified contractors, vendors, folks who have had the appropriate training to do that. Yes, thank you.
See somebody with scissors.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Thank you for being with us. That takes us to Bill 2076.
Bill 2076, resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh and the director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure to receive grant funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation's Green Light Go program in the amount of $430,013 to upgrade traffic control switches.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Bill 2077.
Bill 2077, resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh and the director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure to receive grant funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation's Green Light Go program in the amount of $954,552.43 to replace traffic signals at the intersections of Penn Avenue and Highland Avenue, South Aiken Avenue and Ellsworth Avenue, and Bayard Street and Neville Street.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second discussion.
Discussion? Councilman Schlossberger?
Thank you. Really, just to say thanks to Domi for consistently striving to find grant funding, such as the PennDOT's Greenlight Go program, to help cover these costs. These 3 intersections happen to be either adjacent to or in the district I represent, and Penn and Highland, as we know, is near Target. It's really, really unsafe for pedestrians currently, and I know probably millions of dollars could be spent on making that, the perfect intersection for all users. But the upgrades there will be important. South Aiken and Ellsworth is an intersection that has been called for by residents to upgrade for years now. After there were multiple crashes, one car flipped over into someone's yard there. I mean, just really high speeds, and glad that that's being taken care of in Bayard and Neville as well. So I'm glad to see these moving forward, and I'm also glad that we're Domi is consistently seeking funding for these types of projects, which we know they do so well. They bring in lots of money for the projects that they work on. So kudos to them.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Bill 2078.
Bill 2078, resolution providing for a supplemental agreement or agreements with Lori Hepner for costs associated with the Davis Avenue Bridge project, providing for the payment of the cost thereof, not to exceed $54,444, an increase of $24,444 to the amount previously authorized by Resolution 205 of 2022 to add additional funding for public art as part of the project.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Bill 2079.
Bill 2079, resolution providing for an agreement or agreements with Gulasek Construction LLC for costs associated with construction for the Critical Sidewalk Gaps Project, providing for the payment of the cost thereof, not to exceed $1,156,475.35, reimbursable at 100%.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Bill 2080.
Bill 2080, a resolution providing for a supplemental agreement or agreements with Gannett Fleming, Inc. for costs associated with the Mount Washington Landslide Mitigation Project, providing for the payment of the cost thereof, not to exceed $2,157,000, an increase of $157,000 to the amount previously authorized by Resolution 636 of 2021 to add additional funding for the services during construction phase of the project.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Just brief discussion. Do you mind if I just want to just say thank you to Domi for their work, and Congressman Doyle for his work previously in getting us a grant for $10 million for Grandview Avenue. But I want to thank Domi for their work here, because they've been very helpful in getting addressing some of the issues. And across my district, I know it's been a challenge for them with very little money and very little people to work, but they've been really doing a great job, especially with the landslides. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Bill 2081.
Bill 2081, resolution providing for an agreement or agreements with Power Contracting Company for costs associated with the construction for the Pittsburgh Downtown Wayfinding Project, providing for the payment of the cost thereof, not to exceed $1,761,235, reimbursable at 100%.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. That moves us to Land Use and Economic Development Committee, which is chaired by Councilman Wilson. Our first new paper is Bill 2084.
Bill 2084, resolution authorizing the mayor and the director of the Office of Management and Budget to enter into an agreement or agreements with various community-based organizations for the implementation of the 2023 Neighborhood Economic Development Program, and to provide for the payment of the cost thereof at a cost not to exceed $500,000.
Motion to hold 2 weeks.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Bill be held 2 weeks. Bill 2089.
Bill 2089, ordinance amending the Pittsburgh Code, Title 9 Zoning Code, Article 5, Use Regulations, Chapter 911, Primary Uses at Section 911.02, Use table in Article 6, Development Standards, Chapter 914, Parking, Loading, and Access, at Section 914.02, Off-Street Parking Schedules, and adding Section 912.09, Point B, Child Care Accessory Use, at Chapter 912, Accessory Uses and Structures, at all to amend Child Care Uses and Standards.
Motion to send this City Planning Commission and discussion.
Second.
And discussion?
Yeah. With discussion.
Second.
Okay. With discussion. Councilman Wilson?
No, I just want to thank the city planning for working with us on this important piece of legislation, and I think that what this can do, for childcare in Pittsburgh and families that are looking for affordable care, it's important because we're going to remove some of the red tape here, hopefully, with their approval, and then also the parking requirement. So as the rescue dollars go away to the child care centers, it's important that we make sure that there is less barriers to access to affordable child care. And this is for 1 to 6 children in basically a smaller daycare, and and then also the child cares are still required to get the state licensure. So before if this is passed, then they wouldn't have to go through all the hoops and everything that they would previously with us, so that they can operate. They always have to get the state licensure, and that would still continue. So safety of the children wouldn't be at risk here with any of these amendments. I wanted to thank Councilwoman Gross for joining me on this bill. Appreciate all the work that her and other colleagues have done for child care in the city of Pittsburgh, and will continue to do, from what I hear, in terms of dollars that we spent. So with that,
Thank you. Councilwoman Gross?
Thank you. I appreciate Councilman Wilson inviting me to be co-sponsor on this legislation. And just a reminder to the public and to members, if you didn't join us for the post agenda that we had recently on childcare, we had some really good testimony about operating costs for childcare agencies. The good news is that City Council had appropriated a few $1 million to invest in city-owned childcare facilities, both in-home and centers, before the pandemic. Some of that money was matched by PNC during the pandemic. We know that across the state of Pennsylvania, 50,000 seats were lost since the beginning of the pandemic, because it's been such a crisis for care work, for worker pay. It's been a real struggle for these very thin bottom line businesses just to stay open. And we know that the participants in the program that City Council created raised wages, added workers, and added children, added seats. So we were able, for the participants in the programs that we supported, to grow their capacity. And I believe that we should continue to do more. And so thank you for everyone who over the years has voted to appropriate those funds. But we heard testimony at the post agenda, which again is available on Legistar, that overhead costs are really part of what puts some of these facilities out of business. So having the at-home care saves that much more on commercial rent. These are very, very small facilities, but the more that we have them across the city in the neighborhoods where they're needed, where parents need them, is, I think, better. And I'm really supportive of us doing everything we can to make it easier to operate an in-home childcare. Again, regulated by the state, all safety requirements are being met, but these are generally women-owned businesses. A significant portion of them are minority-owned businesses as well. They can help build wealth, but also help our parents find safe places to put their kids. So again, thank you, Councilman Wilson, for putting this together. I'm happy to co-sponsor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Strasburger?
Thank you. I really want to thank the sponsors of this bill, Councilman Wilson, Councilwoman Gross, for working on this and for putting this forward. As we heard from the post agenda, and as we know, we have to both provide, as we can as a city, additional resources to help bolster childcare availability in the city, because it is an economic issue and not a family issue. And we also, have the responsibility to remove barriers where we can. There's so little that the city can control. Zoning is one thing, and this is something that, pending approval from, it's the Planning Commission, correct? The Planning Commission, that I hope to see this move forward quickly, because any barrier that we can remove from, especially the smaller childcare facilities that really fill a needed gap, in a really crucial way, we should be doing, and this is one. It seems small. It's changing, it's changing the sort of requirements for establishing such a smaller child care center, but I think it really could make a difference for removing barriers. So and time to get those up and running. So I'm really appreciative and fully support.
Thank you, Madam President.
Yeah, I'm going to wait until hear what city planning says when they come back. But I definitely understand the need for childcare, because I watch my own grandchildren. For a while there, I was watching my own grandchildren try to help out my family because they needed childcare. But I also know that this does not do a lot to increase quality childcare, which is what we're really missing in this area. And I really would like to see Pittsburgh Public Schools and the city of Pittsburgh, I would like to see Pittsburgh Public Schools start something for childcare that is less costly than what they, even their pre-K is, I think, $7,000. It's not free with like some like the other schools. But I'd like to see us do something that's bringing quality childcare to the city of Pittsburgh. Oftentimes, some of these homes that people have childcare in are not quality childcare. So I'd like to make sure that they're quality and that they're safe and that they're meeting the expectations that the Women's Caucus had worked on years ago, putting forward, making sure that there are some real standards in place to help people to get to a point where they're providing quality programs. I know that there's a lot of concern in general about childcare across the city and about our schools, and it really is a broader conversation I think needs to happen in general about what we're doing. But I'd love to see us here in the city of Pittsburgh also start a childcare program for our employees that are struggling all the time with places to put their children, their grandchildren. A lot of our grandparents are raising second-time around grandchildren. Their second-time around grandparent programs. So they're raising their grandchildren as well. So I'd like to see them all have I'd like to see us do this in a more comprehensive way and with the conversation with Pittsburgh Public Schools, so that we're taking care of kids, their entire lives, with the things we can do and helping empower their families to do the things they need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Second round, Councilman Wilson?
Yeah, sorry, I need to go a second round because I was a little self-conscious about my voice. And so I'm thinking that I didn't want to talk as much, but there's a few points that I missed out on that I was really debating on whether I talk about this now or when it comes back. But, before it goes to Planning Commission, I just want to state a couple more things. One is a thank you to Trying Together. Pittsburgh, they're an organization that, does a lot of advocacy around childcare, and my office worked closely with them to understand the need here. So I want to thank them for helping us more around the picture. And they were at the post agenda, so everything was very timely. So appreciate them being there and expressing that as well there. So, but the points I want to make though is that this bill is more than just childcare. To me, my wife and I both work, as do Pittsburghers. We're unlike no one else in that respect, where we have to go to work. We have children. I have 3 children, and this is a little off topic, but I think our youngest child gets a little confused because he came up in a time where we didn't leave to go to work. And he's 4 now, so he doesn't really understand that we got to go to work. So it's hard. It's very challenging in the morning sometimes because he doesn't understand. Like, sorry, you have to go to preschool, daycare, and it is challenging. But anyway, the point that I want to make is that all Pittsburghers want to go to work, and seeing downtown, with more vacancy than we'd like, and employers are, expecting their employees to come downtown more often. There's more of a push for that. I think that this legislation, hopefully it can speak to some of those needs there where, as this rescue dollars do leave our area, that this, by cutting this red tape and taking these barriers down, that families can have a chance at getting to work and fulfilling the need of not only the employer's expectations, but also, just how we can feel a little more normal. We obviously want to be around our children, but the world needs a turn as well. So, I wanted to just make sure I said that because I think it's important to note. Also, I also just see this as a bill where, really improving processes at the city. I often try and do a lot of work around legislation and bills. For instance, the outdoor dining legislation or the overhaul of RPP, the residential permanent parking program, because in a lot of ways, although I do, I have a family, I see the need. I talk to Trying Together. I was at the Post Agenda. I see the need. I see the numbers and what's expected in terms of dollars to run the centers and all the hoops that they have to jump through to make that happen. I still have a place in my heart that really wants to just make sure that the departments are running efficiently and that they're not bogged down with different things. For instance, we have the numbers, and I'm eager to share that when the bill comes back in terms of the amount of time and effort that each department takes, or this department takes to to hear these different cases, and most of the time there's basically 99% of the time it's no issue at all. And so we don't want to clog up the system. We want to make sure that government's actually not putting up barriers to people, but then also that the people in the department don't have this extra load, because when I have received multiple emails about I'm waiting for zoning to get back to me. Okay, well, how much does zoning have to do every day? And so let's just take this off their plate, because there's a ridiculous amount of work that has to be done to make sure that this city's operating effectively. And we need to start looking at these departments and asking literally every department, what is your bucket list on if you didn't have to do every day that you don't think is essential? What is that? So always happy to have those conversations with the departments and appreciate their honesty when they can give it.
Thank you, Councilman Warwick.
Just in regards to that, I'm glad to see this, just an ordinance amending the zoning code coming from council. If it seems quick and simple, that's what we should be doing. Of course, we want to work, and it'll go to the planning commission, it'll get reviewed and all of that, but the zoning code can seem very daunting. So I know that we hesitate to make changes to it, but when stuff is sort of low-hanging fruit, I'm glad to see this. So thanks for kind of taking the first step on what I hope are many additional steps over the next year.
I just want to add that, this work on the bill couldn't be done without, Corey Lehman and Kate Rakes having a big seat at the table here to make sure that it's done properly. So I want to thank the department and them as well.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The bill will be sent to the Planning Commission. That takes us to Innovation, Performance, Asset Management, and Technology Committee, chaired by Councilwoman Warwick. We have one new paper, Bill 2083.
Bill 2083, resolution authorizing the mayor and the director of the Department of Innovation and Performance to enter into an agreement and/or agreements and amendments thereto with Twilio for internet-based communication services required to support various City of Pittsburgh customer engagement communications at a cost not to exceed $238,325 over 2 years.
Motion to approve, brief discussion?
Second.
Yeah, so, the director's here, do you want to come up since you're here? Yeah, sure. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Good morning, good afternoon. Heidi Norman, Director of Department of Innovation and Performance.
Hi. Gwendolyn Moore, Assistant Director, Business Technology, Department of Innovation and Performance.
So my understanding on this is that this is for our city's call centers. That would be the IMP internal service, 311 and PLI.
Correct. It began during the pandemic when everyone went home with our internal service desk for IT as well as for 311 to call in. It was quite successful, and so since then, DPW, PLI, Finance Department, various call centers around the city have added into using Twilio.
And that's the increase for this year?
Correct. And for next year. We are now, we have issued an RFP because Twilio was acquired under the emergency proclamation at the time, and now we want to go back and do a full RFP to move towards what's called unified communication systems so that everyone has access to these services. And until we get that RFP awarded and the services in place to replace Twilio, unless Twilio is the winning bid, we just need to extend the contract through next year.
So that's just what I wanted to have clarified for council, that we are...
It doesn't clarify for me.
Oh.
So in addition to the contact centers, it's also used by DPW to route their calls. So what it does is when the pandemic started, we needed to relocate our people for 311 and the service desk to be able to take calls from the public and from the from our staff. In order to do that, we had to use what we would call a voice over IP communication service, that call could be received at their home, at their desk, or wherever they were. So we were able to maintain consistent service for calling in from our constituents as well as from our staff. DPW also does not have people at all of their locations 24/7 when their operation is up and running. So they use the Twilio service to route their calls to a person who is able to answer questions from the constituents. Finance uses it because there are many calls come in and they route their calls to a particular person with an area of expertise. So when they call the main number, you can go to real estate, ISAT, or any other types of things. So it's being used in different areas, not just the call centers, but it enables you to route the call to the person or area who can handle that call.
And then that person can take that call from wherever they happen to be.
That's yes, correct. Any device that's connected to the internet.
Thank you. Madam President?
So just a few things. So you allowed people to expand on the system, and that's where you need the additional cost. Is that what I want to make sure I'm clear.
Yeah, additional departments wanted to be able to respond to constituent and internal calls.
You didn't say that we don't have that in this contract at this time? You have to wait until we rebid the contract?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The original contract with Twilio was procured under the emergency declaration during the pandemic, and we felt it was right to go back and do a full RFP for everything that we want in unified communications, not just the call centers and these little slivers. Yeah. So Twilio has been expanded to other departments, as requested, including PLI, DPW, et cetera, and into next year. We just need to extend this one more year while we are in the process of reviewing the bids in the RFP and awarding that and getting a new service
I'm gonna be
underway.
honest, I don't even like the idea of it because when I first started here, we had directors that not only responded to council members, but they responded to constituents. They were held accountable. I feel like we keep putting barriers around the people that are supposed to be accountable, and it's not really allowing those people to have access to the people that they should have access to all the time. You're giving them somebody in that department to talk to, but oftentimes it was directors who responded at all hours of the day and night. And I just feel like I'm just going to not be supportive of today.
Okay.
Thank you. I can see everybody wants to clarify. Did I misunderstand something?
If I may, in response to your concerns, the 311 system is being used by cities all over the country. When
Right.
a call comes into 311,
I understand the 311
that
part.
representative can direct the call to the director or whoever is able to handle that service. They're just the liaison and one number that everyone
Right.
knows to
No,
call.
I
So it's more of
understand
a
that.
convenience in
Right.
that a constituent might
For
not
whom?
know a director's number, but they do know 311, and 311 can direct the call appropriately.
I do understand that happens. I understand
yes,
that.
thank
I
you.
understand how 311 works. It's just overall, I just don't like the idea. Thank you.
Councilwoman Strasburger.
Well, I was just going to speak in favor of this. I realize you're not HR, but I think that the future of attracting workforces to city governments, municipal governments, is not going to be the pension benefits and that's kind of like, yes, that's great. We want pension, we want strong benefits, but it's going to be flexibility. And to have the ability to attract staff who then can work in the office some days, but also work from home some other days, this technology allows for that, and I think that's going to be a huge piece to attracting the workforce that we so desperately need in this city going forward. So I'm in favor of it as a small slice of, for all the purposes that you already mentioned, and for that purpose as well.
Second round, Madam President.
So to be clear, my staff sometimes works from home, but they use their cell phones and they use whatever laptops, whatever we have. They didn't need this to do that, and we also do that for our whole staff here on this floor. So I just want to be clear that are you saying that that's needed for them to do their work from home? Because I want to be clear. I want to understand this.
Yeah. So to be clear, what voice over IP is, it's different from cell phones. So if, for example, someone calls into the main number of my department and everyone in my department is on voice over IP, which
Right.
is a Twilio. Twilio is the company that provides it to us. That call can be forwarded to anyone at any location if they're in the field and working at one of our facilities. If they're at home, that's correct. Council doesn't currently use VoIP. You have
but I do
desk
have
phones.
that where the calls are transferred to my phone. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
So right now, your Centrex line is programmed to go to your cell phone. In voice over IP, we don't have to pre-program it. It'll go wherever you are. So in other words, someone in your office dials 9 and forwards your number to your cell phone number. In voice over IP, you won't have to have that manual intervention. It will find you wherever you are.
Right.
Yeah.
We
No,
come,
I
we
don't
came
have a
in
manual
and
intervention.
customized that specifically for you.
Everything is programmed according to the needs of that individual. Perhaps your department does not need that, and we wouldn't program that for your
So what I
department.
have now, just so I can make sure, someone calls my office, and after 2-3 rings, if it's not picked up, it goes right to my cell phone now.
That's correct.
That's correct. We have programmed that for you in the
Right.
Centrex system,
So is it-
which
okay.
is not a voice over IP
Okay.
system.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I want to make
correct.
sure.
We have multiple telephone systems in the city right now.
Yeah.
We're
I just
hoping-
try to be available to the public as much as I
Of
can, and I would like
course.
for our directors to be the same way.
Of
That's all.
course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm an abstain.
Any
sir.
abstentions? One abstention. Affirmative recommendation. Thank you all for being
Thank
here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
That moves us to Intergovernmental and Educational Affairs Committee, chaired by Councilwoman Gross. Our first new paper is Bill 2069.
Bill 2069, resolution adopting plan revision to the City of Pittsburgh's official sewage facilities plan for 442 52nd Street, Pittsburgh, PA 15201, at no cost to the city.
Councilman?
It's your committee.
It's my committee?
It's not your
Bobby.
committee, it's Councilwoman Gross's
Right.
committee. She told me she had spoke to you about these bills.
Me? Okay, motion to approve.
Is there a
Second.
second? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation, Bill 2070.
Bill 2070, resolution adopting plan revision to the City of Pittsburgh's official sewage facilities plan for Miller and Reed Street at no cost to the city.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation, Bill 2071.
Bill 2071, resolution approving execution of a contract for disposition by sale of land between the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh or an Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh affiliate and Citizen Science Lab or related entity for the sale of Block 27A, lots 177, 178, 179, 180, 180A, 181, 182, 183, 184, 186, 187, 188, and 189 in the 5th Ward of the City of Pittsburgh. Council District Number 6 at no cost to the city.
To approve.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation, Bill 2072.
Bill 2072, resolution providing for the execution of a cooperation agreement or agreements with the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh for the performance of certain work in connection with the 2023-2024 Community Development Block Grant Program and providing for the payment of the cost thereof not to exceed $9,500,000, all council districts.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. And lastly, Bill 2073.
Bill 2073, resolution authorizing a cooperation agreement or agreements with the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh, designating URA as the city's agent for administration of the 2023-2024 Home Investments Partnership Program at a cost not to exceed $2,557,679, all council districts.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion.
Discussion, Councilman Wilson?
I just want to ask where the funding's going.
Good morning, David Geiger, Director of Government and Strategic Affairs at the URA. For the home investment partnerships, this is used as a funding source largely for two programs at the URA, our rental gap program and our for sale development program. The former being for gap fill on rental development projects and the latter being gap fill on for sale homeownership projects. The home program, which is federal funding, prioritizes extremely low income residents. So we're talking 50% AMI and below for the most part. And then on the for sale housing, that can go up to like 80% AMI.
So this additional funding to the, let's say the home, I'm sorry, let's say the, what was the second one, the second bucket?
I'm sorry.
Home closing costs or home?
Rental.
Oh,
no.
It's used for the for sale development program.
For sale development program.
Yeah.
So, who builds the house?
It depends. It is an open application on our website where developers, both for-profit and nonprofit developers, are eligible to apply. Those applications are underwritten by staff. It goes in front of the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board, then to the URA board for approval.
Okay, so developers are applying for this. And then how many homes would this cover?
I'd have to get back to you with that number. It's only $2 million, and it is split between both the rental and the for sale.
Yeah.
But I can get you an estimate on how many
Like two
affordable
houses.
units that creates. I think it's a little bit more than two, but it's not nearly enough.
I just know how much how much it costs to build new house.
New or rehab.
All right, thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councilman Coghill.
Yes. Mr. Geiger, so how is that distributed between rental and for sale proportionally? More goes to rental, more goes to for sale, or is it?
I can get back to you with what the split is. I don't have that at my fingertips.
Right. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, it seems like it would be more beneficial to do rental because it would go further, correct? I mean, we can help out a lot more in the rental area than we can for sale because it eats up a bigger chunk of money.
Generally, your cost per unit is going to be cheaper on rental development than for sale homeownership.
When you say rental development, you mean somebody who's building a rental space, or are you talking about somebody who's currently renting?
Someone that would be building units for rent.
Oh, this is for all new construction then.
Once again, it can be used for new construction or for rehab projects.
Okay. Okay.
Madam President?
I just want to say, just to be clear, we talked about this yesterday. This is for projects like Richard Snipe does, where he did the neighborhood stabilization program. We did 2 stabilization programs in Sheridan, where you rehab some of the housing, and that's one of the things we want to see in our area. We don't want to demo everything. We'd like to see some of the homes redone, and so this will go towards some of that type of stuff. Correct?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The NSP is Neighborhood Stabilization Program is a different federal program that's since expired. However, the funding that goes into the FSDP, the For Sale Development Program, is something that the PHDC, led by Richard Snipe, can access funding for to do development projects like you're discussing.
And I want to say we have Banksville resident Chris Eberline on that board. But I do know they're doing a lot, and I love the projects Richard's done in our area and seeing people get into home ownership. And actually, when we were looking the other day in Elliott, he was looking at some homes. A woman came out; her rent just increased to $1,200 on Section 8, $1,200 plus utilities, and so Richard's helping her. Like get into a place that's affordable for her and her. She has foster kids. She keeps foster children. Actually, CYF. She's one of the homes that where CYF calls her and asks her to keep it, but she's going to lose her home because she can't afford. The rent has gone up so much. So, but I want to thank him for his work. Thank you, and yours for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Affirmative recommendation. That exhausts our agenda. We do have meeting announcements. This afternoon at 1:30 p.m., Council will hold a Cablecast post agenda to discuss the Office of Community Health and Safety. Councilman Coghill will chair. Due to the Tuesday, November 7th elections next week, Council will hold its regular meeting on Monday, November 6th at 9 a.m., and the Standing Committee meeting will begin at 12:30 p.m. on Monday. Speaker registration will close at 10 a.m. for the regular Council meeting and 12 p.m. for the Standing Committee meeting on the day of the meeting. To register to speak, please fill out the sign-up form on the Council meeting webpage or call the Clerk's office at 412-255-2138 by 12 p.m. Is there anything from members? Councilman Warwick.
Yeah, I have 2 things. One is I'd like to call a post agenda on Controller Lamb's special report on the Parks Tax Fund.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? We'll work with the clerk's office to get that scheduled. And just a point of clarity, I misspoke. The meeting on Monday is not at 12:30, it's at 1:30, our Standing Committee meeting. Anything else from members?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly just address the vandalism that took place yesterday in Somerset at Frick. All across the country, we are seeing cities, organizations, communities being sort of torn apart by the situation in Israel and Gaza right now. And of course, we can all have, differing opinions, views, understandings of the history, et cetera. That is fine, right? We can discuss these things. But I do just want to remind everyone in the public that, when we talk about anti-Semitism, we can't have these discussions without acknowledging that anti-Semitism is as deeply ingrained in our culture in the United States as racism, sexism, Islamophobia, homophobia, anti-immigrant sentiment. It does not need to be explicit, right? It's what we have for breakfast, right? It's in the water we drink. It's something that has been part of our culture for centuries. I mean, even going back to Shakespeare, right? You can find, it's so deeply ingrained in us. So, when we have incidents like this that are clearly directed at communities with lots of Jewish residents, right? To get into conversations about, what did it say? What were the words? Well, was it actually? This is intended to frighten and intimidate people because of their religion, because they are Jewish. That is why this was done in this neighborhood. So, when you get into this, well, this or that, or what did it say? You are buying into, this is anti-Semitism, and we cannot have a productive conversation in our community about this very complicated issue that is affecting so many of us if we don't first acknowledge that feeling, right? It doesn't have to be explicit. Just like racism, sexism, it doesn't have to be explicit. There are many things that people say and do that are inherently racist, sexist, homophobic, that they don't even know that they're doing or saying. And in order to have these conversations, we have to acknowledge that up front. So please, I'm asking anybody who is, and we're all talking about that, and we're talking about this issue, and it's all over the news, and it's good for us to talk about it, but please, keep that in mind at the beginning of every discussion. Keep in mind how this feels. This is violence against the Jewish community. There's no question. So anyway, that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else from members? If not, motion to excuse the absent members, approve the minutes, and adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.